Welcome, everyone. This is Sandy Lerman from Heartstrong International. I am so excited tonight. We have a special guest for our Trauma-Informed Changemakers book club and community. Some of you may be listening to this recording later, but the folks that are with us tonight are really passionate about trauma-informed practices to support children, whether we're working with parents or teachers or in any organization where we're serving kids who've had some rough upbringing or some difficult challenges in their lives. So I am excited for our guest tonight. We have Dr. Mona Delahooke, who is a licensed clinical psychologist. She has more than 30 years of experience caring for children and families. She's a senior faculty member of the Profectum Foundation, which is an organization dedicated to supporting families of neurodiverse children, adolescents, and adults. She's a trainer for the Los Angeles County Department of Mental Health. Dr. Delahooke is a member of the American Psychological Association and holds the highest level endorsement in the field of infant and toddler mental health in California as a reflective practice mentor, RPM. She is a frequent speaker, trainer, and consultant to parents, organizations, schools, and public agencies. Dr. Delahooke has dedicated her career to promoting compassionate, relationship-based neurodevelopmental interventions for children with developmental behavior, emotional, and learning differences. Welcome, Dr. Delahooke.
That's so long.
So excited to have you here. Well, I wanted to make
so
sure everybody knows that this is not new for you. You've been doing this work for a long time. I know you're very dedicated to supporting some of our most vulnerable children and some of our most challenging children. And so that's what we're here for tonight. We want to learn about your new book. We're going to talk about that. We want to get some ideas for how we can support children. How can we support adults that are helping children? And then what can we do as leaders as we're going out trying to really change the paradigm of what we're seeing? So I'm so excited that you're here. And this is, we've known each other for a while. I was so excited when your first book came out. And well, this wasn't your first book, but your most recent book that really exploded onto the scene, Beyond Behaviors. It has been so successful. So many people are resonating with the ideas in that book. So I wanted to ask you, since you wrote the book Beyond Behaviors, and all of the folks here tonight, I think all of them have either read it or are in the process of reading it right now. What inspired you to go on to write this book that's specific for parents, your new book that's coming out, Brain Body Parenting? Tell us about that process.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for the conversation we had. I think it was right when Beyond Behaviors came out. Yeah. You and I talked, and it was a wonderful interview, and I had no idea if there would be if people would resonate with that book. I knew it reflected my experiences and the things that I was observing and the way I was viewing kind of the inequity and equities that I was observing and how our vulnerable and behaviorally challenged children were treated. But I had no idea if anyone else would resonate. And I'm so grateful that it has, really. So thank you, and thank everybody who's here and who listens to this if you've read Beyond Behaviors, because this was a book that is organically moving around. There was no marketing, there was no, it was just me and a small publishing company. So thank you so much from the bottom of my heart.
Well, thank you, and you're absolutely welcome. I know when I read it, I just remember thinking, oh my goodness, everybody needs to read this book. So that was my
You were very, yes,
it was great too on Amazon reviews. I'm like, everybody go buy this and then buy extra copies and give it to everybody, because it says what so many of us have been trying to say, but not as articulately, I think. You just made it really understandable for people. So thank you for doing that.
Well, yeah, thank you.
Decide to then write a book specific.
So I realized in Beyond Behaviors, I really was focusing on this whole idea of behavioral challenges, regardless of where they come from, across diagnostic criteria. So, it was focused on behavioral challenges. Mm-hmm. And then I realized I really wanted to now write a book that would be expanded to all of parenting, kind of yes, you're right. I have been in the field for 30 years, and I am you know, I'm tired, and I'm doing great, but I'm feeling now as I round the corner on 3 decades to give parents, and maybe particularly parents who have questions about development, really kind of the bottom line on what the resilience literature says, what the trauma research says, what the neurobiology is, and kind of cut through. It's been very interesting to take a look at the parenting approaches out there, to the parenting world, because I've been in the professional world and now I'm dipping my toe into the parenting world. And it's really fascinating at how many different arrays of advice parents are getting. It's kind of across the board.
Yeah.
And it's really an interesting interest. If you look at Instagram, if you look at Facebook, TikTok, there is a lot of information out there. And I wanted to very compassionately and humbly just let parents know what I think is the most solid advice if we want to raise resilient children, based on what we know about how the brain and body develop and how human beings, with all the challenges that we're faced with. And you and I would have never known, right, that we would be entering into a pandemic the next year after we talked.
Right.
Who would have known that the stress that parents were facing in 2019 would even get so much worse in the next few years? So anyway, the pandemic gave me that chance. I was going to wait a few more years because I'm super busy training on the book, but all of a sudden I had a lot of time on my hands. We had lockdowns here in LA, and it was 9 months of writing about 10 hours a day. It was so much fun. I went into a writing bubble. I couldn't see my family except for my spouse, and it was the perfect time to write and to research. So
Yes.
basically, that's why I wrote it.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought up the pandemic because I had no idea starting a trauma-informed program that we were going to have collective trauma on such a scale that we have had since the pandemic.
Right.
And so I've heard someone say recently that if the pandemic was the earthquake, the mental health and trauma that's coming as a result of it is the tsunami. And now we are seeing that tsunami in our adults that are caring for children. And as you know, with the neuroscience, with mirror neurons and everything else relational, the way that we support our children, if we aren't well resourced, then our children suffer. So I'm hearing from teachers, I was a classroom teacher for many years, and it was stressful when I was in the classroom, but the stress that the teachers and the parents are under right now is beyond anything I can imagine when we started this program. So people are desperate for this information. So great timing for your book. I think it's really helpful. So let's talk about the neuroscience a little bit. I know that, thank you for letting me get an advanced copy of the book. So I've read some things and I wanted to touch on just a few, I think really important key ideas.
Sure.
We'll give everybody information about how to pre-order the book here in a little bit, but let's talk about how are traditional parenting and teaching methods failing our children, and in some cases, maybe even traumatizing our children. And then how is your approach different? And I can say that my approach, you talked about all the parenting approaches. In our approach at Heartstrong, we use this neurodiverse, neuroscience, relational support, scaffolded support. So you tell me a little bit about in the book what the research says about that.
That's beautiful. Well, truly, I think the paradigm shift that we all are looking at is understanding that it isn't necessarily the script or the parenting technique or tool that you use, the one size fits model, or behavioral approaches that really is the key. What the key is how that approach or how that interaction is landing in your child's nervous system. So the idea of customizing our parenting approaches to this child, to my child in this moment, And I look at three key aspects that I think, again, works for neurotypical children and neurodivergent children, although our neurodivergent children and teenagers and adults, I think, really need this approach in spades, because the platform, what I talk about in the book, the platform, that brain body connection, our nervous system is responding in ways that are unique to that person. And if we don't understand the pathway of their physiology, their where they are at that moment, right? What's coming in? Do they have a sturdy platform? Are they in that nice green pathway, that ventral vagal social engagement system? Or is their system in that red pathway, the fight or flight, the sympathetic nervous system, um, or shut down in the dorsal vagal and blends thereof, because now we know that they're blended pathways. But unless you really know where you are as a parent, first of all, because your interactions are going to be aren't going to be as effective or effective at all if you are completely agitated and
Right.
your heart is racing and your nervous system is wanting to run or to move or to act really aggressively. That's when we're not going to be as effective. So we need to know the state of the platform. And then the second thing we also need to know about our children is where their social and emotional development is. Where are they developmentally? Because we know children don't grow up with their abilities according to their chronological age. We have developmental processes that take from birth on up, to acquire. So we want to know about their platform. We want to know about their development, their social and emotional development, especially. And then thirdly, is that big, huge bucket of individual differences. And if we don't understand a child's a teenager's individual differences, we won't be able to customize our approach and know what's really effective. So those are the three main things I'm thinking about in terms of neurodevelopment: the body, the developmental processes, and then the individual differences.
Yes, and I appreciate so much your emphasis on individual differences, because what I am seeing more and more, I started out as a parent coach for children who were adopted, who had significant early childhood trauma. And then the more I talked to parents of other children, it turned out that there were other kinds of difficulties and challenges and traumas in those children's lives as well. And then as I'm looking at parenting in general and teaching in general, what we're seeing is not only are kids coming to us with what you talked about, that vulnerable platform where they're going into fight, flight, or freeze a lot because of the way the world has been for them, right? Because of the things that have happened to them. But also the way we're approaching our parenting and teaching is causing them to go into the blue or the red pathway as well. And so what we think we're doing to help is actually making things worse. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Right. Well, that's where I think many parents and many adoptive parents or foster parents aren't trained or told that there's a difference between top down and body up or bottom up behaviors. And we tend to think that all behaviors are thought out, planned, motivated, and we don't understand that sometimes behaviors are what we call protective responses that are inspired by the nervous system in a subconscious way, meaning the child isn't thinking about doing that action, but they do it.
Right.
And their nervous system is remembering, and their brain is usually predicting incorrectly that they're in threat, even when they're safe. And that's particularly important to remember, that the brain forms their early predictions as the child wires itself to the environment. And so that early wiring, we do know, is a significantly important time, although there's always hope to shift. But we do know, and I think that's why it's so difficult for a lot of foster parents, for sure, when children have these behaviors that feel so defiant and oppositional and mediated by their thinking mind, and sometimes they are, but that is due to the fact that after a certain amount of years, children begin to believe the narrative that's
Right.
told about them. So it's complicated, as you all know, it's
Yeah.
complicated.
Yes,
Yeah.
and what you just said about parents misunderstanding top down and bottom up,
Mm.
let's talk about that a little bit, because a lot of parents and teachers that I work with, when they're new to this idea, they will say, well, my child just knows how to push my buttons. And I
Yeah.
always ask them to step back for a minute and really consider that that child did not sit down this morning and make a plan for how they were going to disrupt your
Mm.
life today. And a lot of parents and teachers misunderstand that the child really isn't being defiant. The child is fearful, stressed, anxious, and is trying, as you said, is trying to survive based on a pattern that they developed to survive and to protect themselves. So I love what you said there. And let's talk about that top down, bottom up, because I do think that can be confusing. And what I usually tell parents, because they tend to err on the side of thinking it's top down, is to assume it's all there's a bottom up component to everything, especially in a child who was adopted or who's a foster child or who's had significant trauma.
Mm.
They're operating in that protective way to a certain degree. Now, as you said, over some time, they may have developed some patterns and things that are thought based, but there's
Right.
protection there. So what do you think parents should do when they're not sure, or how do we navigate that?
Right. Well, first of all, I think we need to give parents so much compassion,
Mhm.
and we need to give ourselves self-compassion, because it truly is hard not to personalize what your child is doing, and especially after the sacrifices that you make and the loving environment that you create for the child. It's really difficult, and it feels so much like the child is can push our buttons, and maybe sometimes the child, that we can think of that in a different way, of that child has, the brain has learned how to survive and it's predicting wrong, but that's a smart child because their survival mechanisms are are very strong. And I know it's hard in the moment to shift to that mindset, that there is a driver that is beyond the child's consciousness. And but if we remember what Ross Green says, that children do well if they can, if you think about it, there aren't rewards for children's bad behavior.
Mhm.
There really aren't. In our culture, this idea of negative attention doesn't really hold up.
Manipulating to get their needs.
Yes, yeah, it's not how humans, little and big humans, work. So so I think the idea of asking, is this a body up or bottom up or top down behavior, or percentages therein, really helps us kind of move away from it gives us a lens, first of all, I think, to stay a little bit more in the green, as I call it, in our own calm state. It gives us a lens to go, let me observe what's happening right now. Let me pause for a moment and observe. It looks like this child is starting to go into a physiological state of unease, of agitation. And then once you see that, it does kind of take away the blame game, I think, because then you're going, this is a vulnerable child at this moment, or a teenager, or ourselves. This isn't necessarily a master manipulator. It is somebody whose nervous system is striving to feel safe, but in our culture, it doesn't work well.
Yeah, and I
And
think
it doesn't work well at school because
oh,
there's
yeah.
I mean, think about that, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're all supposed to be in the classroom. Everybody's supposed to be on task and paying attention.
Yeah. Yeah.
And bodies, I don't know about you, but when I sit in a staff meeting or any kind of a meeting for more than an hour, I can't sit still that long. I need to get it
Oh,
in my body. And so imagine these little growing beings sitting in a classroom. They're going to move, they're going to make noise, they're going to do things. And it's just not socially acceptable in a classroom.
right. Their
Have
bodies are
body, right?
right. Yeah. And you're absolutely right. The human body uses movement
Mhm.
to settle. And for our children with toxic stress or trauma histories, the triggers oftentimes can be completely invisible. It can be a smell, an odor. It could be a sound or a pitch. It could be subliminal, like they don't really know it. They don't know it, but
Yes.
all of a sudden the body feels like it has to move,
Mhm.
and in that doesn't work well in a classroom. And of course we have to try to work within the child's environment, their community. But I think this lens shift of understanding that not all behavior is motivated to get away from something or to get something, because that's the predominant thinking in behavioral analysis, which most of our teachers are trained in.
Yeah,
So
that's
it's,
what I
you know,
was
I get that.
doing for
Yeah.
over 20 years in the classroom. I was using a behaviorist lens. I had my rules on the board and I had my timeouts and consequences, all the things I was taught to use, but I always intuitively, there would be one or two students that didn't work with. And so I used a relational approach with those students, right?
That's so great. Instinctually, you knew, right?
And there
Yes.
are many teachers that are doing that. They just didn't
Yeah.
know they were using a brain body approach or a trauma informed approach, right?
That's right. That's right. And there's nothing wrong with having the rules, the classroom rules on the wall that you weren't, my idea or my fantasy of how you were as a teacher, because you are a relational person, is that you kept the frame safe. Even though you were trained at looking at behaviors, you knew there was a couple kiddos in there. I'm not gonna do this. I need to relate to them. So instinctively, I think we oftentimes know if you're kind of looking at that.
Yes. And you mentioned in your book, so I want to make sure to say this the right way. So you were talking about, well, so we'll go into the tantrums through toddlers chapter here in a minute, but
Yeah.
you talked about individual differences when we're looking at a behavior and also looking at the intensity, the frequency, and the duration of a behavior, which
Mhm.
I call in our program, they all know this, we call them the lift factors of a meltdown or the lift factors of a behavior, which is the length, the intensity, the frequency, and the triggers. Talk about why it's so important to look at those things before we make a decision on how to support a child who's having a hard time.
Yeah, I love that acronym LIFT, and that is from some of the work that I or the reading and the trainings that I've gone to with Dr. Bruce Perry, and he talks about those factors: the intensity, the length, and what is it? The intensity,
And
duration, and the frequency,
yeah, yeah. And I
uh,
mentioned the triggers, which you were talking about. It
and the
could be
triggers. Yeah,
or a sound, or for my son, it was the
right.
smell of chicken one time. He was
Yes.
adopted from an
And
orphanage and he
odor.
smelled chicken. And I had no idea he had a massive rage, aggressive, explosive rage for 2 hours. I had no idea why. And later on, he told me it was the smell of the chicken. I didn't like
Wow.
it, made me eat chicken and I didn't want to eat it, or something
Wow.
had happened. And so
Yeah.
sometimes we don't know, but if
Right.
even if we don't know right away, what can we do as we're watching a child struggling in the classroom or at home? How do we assess that and how do we address it when it's happening?
Well, I think first of all, I would ask what main pathway they're on. So if we see them go into a quick trigger where there's a lot of movement, a lot of agitation, as you said, and all of a sudden there is things like screaming, crying, sweating,
Mhm.
fast or irregular heartbeat, kicking, spitting, some of those things that we are accustomed to, when we pretty much know that the sympathetic nervous system is the driver. And in that case, of course, I think it's assumed we keep everybody safe. So you make sure the child is safe and those around them are safe. But after that, we really want to customize what we do. And so I have parents fill out charts when it's so that we'll have them ready when they are in a situation to know what are those body-based, sensory-based tools that work for this child. For example, some children, when they're in that state, they do not want to be touched. Others want to be rocked or held tightly.
Mhm.
Some like to have humming or singing or words. Others need no sound. And it's so individual, like even a movement. Some children want to sway or move or pace. Others want to get wrapped up with a really tight blanket. So we kind of, it's an experimentation, not during the time of the
Right. Just
set.
planning ahead and kind of thinking.
It's like planning ahead. Yeah, yeah. And I use this flip chart that I had for Beyond Behaviors, and in it we have these like pages where you list the behaviors, then you list what works. So you actually have access to, you can put it on the fridge, or you can just flip to some of your pages to say, okay, now this is what we need to do. So that's generally for the red behaviors. We generally want to down regulate. If somebody,
and explain the colors quickly for those.
Oh yeah, so I liken the red to the sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight response in the polyvagal theory. So that's where you have activation of the system, and the key characteristic is movement, moving your mouth or moving your body, right? Yelling, screaming,
throwing plate, something like that.
Throwing a plate, throwing an iPad, throwing a remote, those very tough behaviors, or running away, fighting, punching through a door. I mean, it can get very serious. So the red pathway signifies the need to downregulate the system. Mm-hmm. And so the main thing you need to downregulate another nervous system is a nervous system that is downregulated enough. So that means we check in with ourselves first. If we're red, we need to, again, make sure the child is safe, but do something in that moment, or for a few moments, to feel in control.
Take some breaths, move away from the child, get yourself regulated, then come back in. And
then I also have parents make a list for themselves. What are those things? Just memorize them, because sometimes in the moment you forget, but it can be anything. It can be, of course, breathing is a popular one that we know. Deeper exhale, for most people, can help bring on the parasympathetics, bring on the ventral vagal pathway a little bit more. But for some people, it's like, feeling your feet on the ground, or putting your hand on your cheek so that you're just feeling like that sense of touch, or saying a mantra, or getting a cold glass of water and feeling it go down your throat. So yeah, just have yourself ready, because I wish there was a workaround between nervous systems needing each other, but we're humans.
Yes.
And so we do need to make sure that parents know you are the tools. We are the tools itself.
Yeah, somebody has to be the adult in the room, right? And when all of our childhood trauma is being triggered, we can't start throwing our own meltdown and going into that fight or flight as well.
Absolutely. And without our consent, and compassionately, again, it's our nervous system protecting us. So it's really this whole idea of self-care, and I don't even like that word because it brings up the spa, but care of ourselves is not like getting your nails done. It's like having a system where you take care of your physical body and your mental self and your psychological self and your spiritual self, so that you understand that it's actually, they used to use the analogy of putting your oxygen mask on first in a plane. Right. And now for the last year, I've been saying to parents, I think it's more putting on your life support system, because we are so stressed. Parents are so tired. As you guys probably know, the levels of anxiety and depression in parents has gone through the roof. The studies are showing the stress levels, like you said, it's a tsunami. because the trauma has lasted so long. And so, yeah. So, okay. So look and make sure see if what color you're in, make sure you're a semblance of some like light green or that ventral vagal, which is the green pathway, where we're basically calm. We're able to engage our social engagement system. That's what it's called. And then measure what pathway your child is on. How strong is their system right now? How sturdy is their platform? Is it vulnerable, weak, or sturdy? If it's weak, if they're in the red, we try to downregulate. If they're in the blue and checked out and we can't reach them, we really want to try to up regulate. So to get that warmth going, to get hope in the system, so that you kind of introduce movement in that case, whether it's, and again, it has to be something that the child or the teenager enjoys, but it could be, snuggling or a hug or a walk or just letting your shoulders touch, talking. It's, again, you have to find, this is the hard part, is that there's no one size fits all solutions to get people's nervous systems back online.
And sometimes they won't do it right away. And I think parents and teachers get frustrated. Well, he wouldn't use his coping skills, or she wouldn't use her strategies that we've practiced. But the thing is, the brain has to catch up to what you're asking them to do. They can't access that prefrontal cortex to hear even the idea of, let's go to the calm down corner and do some calming activities together, co-regulation. They can't even go there. So
right.
we can't.
So using coping skills, that's like, and it's this is a great question that parents ask. Like, why can't my child use their coping skills? And the answer is that they can't use them when they need them the most. That's really the kind of like, you have to have some semblance of sturdiness in your system in order to remember that you have a coping skill, or read it, or calm your body down enough to have integrated, balanced movements.
Right.
And we're talking about physiology here, movement physiology. But using the colors, we kind of check in. We check in with ourselves, check in with the child, go to the tools and strategies that will help that child get back to some semblance of calm. And then you work from the body up to the top down.
Right.
So I think we're taught to talk. I certainly, in my field, that talk therapy is the end all. And believe me, I'm a huge fan of talk therapy.
When you can access that part of your brain.
It's amazing. But we have to know when it's the time to talk and when it's the time to be and to relate and to share our nervous system.
Right.
And that's what I think that's what I tried to do in this new book, is to get the instructional guide. What is co-regulation? What does it, is it just being nice to your kid? No, it's a very detailed process where we notice their small movements in their body, in their faces, in their emotional tone. Of course, this is for infants, what they need. And then as you grow older, ideally, you learn how to self-regulate more and more. But many of our traumatized children, many of our parents who have trauma histories, are still working on self-regulation, and that's okay.
Yes. And I always tell parents and teachers, the key, like the foundation of all of this, is to connect to, first of all, your compassion for yourself. You were talking about self-compassion and self-care. And then connect to your compassion for where the child is and what's happening, and don't make any judgment or try to do or fix anything in the moment. Just connect heart to heart, connect to your compassion, because they're not doing it to try to harm you. Like, they're really not doing it on purpose, even if it might be a little bit of top down. Generally, when a child is in that red zone, they're really just doing everything they can. And I think, and maybe you can help me find the studies to back this up, but I think they're trying to share how they are feeling with us by showing us that. so that we can understand, because they can't articulate it in words. They can't say, I'm really having a difficult time with this, Mom. The smell of the chicken is really irritating my trauma history. That's
Right,
something
right,
with my
right,
face. So if they throw this massive meltdown, then I can say, whoa, this kid is really upset. And that's their way of showing us that. It's not that they're trying to be defiant or break the rules or that kind of thing. So that relationship, that connection, that
right.
compassionate understanding is key, and it's hard. It's the
It's
hardest
really
part,
hard.
but
And I
you
think,
have to get really quick. Like I call it the rapid forgiveness cycle when I practice it.
yeah,
Because
yeah.
you have to get to the point where you can just say, okay, just let that go. I say Elsify, let it go. Let it go. We're not going to go train the
Yeah,
child right now. It's not the time to
yeah.
teach them the rules. It's the time to regulate, co-regulate.
Right, right, right. And just I've been thinking a lot about this idea of like um, communication in this process of like showing us. And I think I wonder if I think maybe that children, if they could hide their tantrum from us or their dysregulation from us, they would.
Mhm.
So I think I'm not sure they are trying to show us anything. I think they're trying not to show us.
And a lot of
So that might help.
all day at school and then let it go at home. So it's very interesting how sometimes we see it at home and not at school, or we see it at school and not at home. So
Right,
it's like this
right.
volcanic, and here it comes.
Yes, yes, because the thresholds for that inhibitory control shift throughout the day. And imagine the amount of energy that's getting expended
Right. Trying to
to
hold.
inhibit, because you don't want to get in trouble. You don't want to be embarrassed. You don't want people to look at you for having that. So yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So what do you think about when a child is doing something that's a quote against the rules? Is it better to set that aside and relate to the child and just get into co-regulation first, or is it better to hold them accountable for the rule and worry about social emotional things later? Because I feel like teachers are under a lot of pressure to make sure everybody, follows the rules. How do we navigate that in a system that's very rule based, very punitive based? And then we'll talk a little bit about leadership for changing the paradigm of how we do things in schools,
Mhm.
obviously at home too, but especially in a classroom of 30 kids who are maybe half of them or more dysregulated.
Right, right. Well, my head has been around a lot of toddlers lately. So let me just answer from a developmental way. For a toddler who has regular toddlers, we can expect them to have to lose it because they are so early on in their trips around the block that their brains have difficulty predicting what's going to happen next, and human brains love to predict. So that's why something like getting the wrong color uh, sippy cup can just throw them for a loop because they don't have that context to say, oh, don't worry, it's okay, it's in the dishwasher.
Right.
Their nervous system senses threat because they predicted wrong. It's called a prediction error, and it's kind of sweet in a way now that I know about that, because once you recognize, if a toddler is about to grab a knife and they can't, you
Mhm.
can still do like prevent them from doing it. Have the rule, no, you
Mhm.
may never touch this knife. This is
Mhm.
mommy's. This is not yours.
Right.
And oh my goodness, you are feeling so frustrated right now.
Mhm.
So I
You're
think
being
we can
safe. You have safe
coexist.
boundaries. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you can have your family rules. As a teacher, I think you can absolutely have classroom rules
Mhm.
and empathy at the same time. So like if a child is a student is going against a rule that is a safety rule,
Right.
the teacher may say, oh gosh, you know, that rule is there, sweetheart, but I can so tell how much you need to move your body right now. Could you please help me up here? Or let's see if you and a buddy can go and grab something for me from the back room, and just like do both, hold the
Yeah.
rule and join. It's
Yeah.
not either or. I think we can try to do both. I know that sounds easier than it is, but I
It's
think we
probably.
can hold rules and still
Yeah.
empathize and witness. I think that's one of the things that Dr. Porges talks about, is the power of witnessing
Mhm.
someone's distress without feeling like you have to fix it in a second, and without being overly dramatic about it, but just witnessing. I see how hard this is for you right now, and you're not alone.
I love that. And I think I love that you use the knife as an example, because for me, when I'm working with highly explosive children who have severe trauma histories and
Yeah.
massive dysregulation episodes, I tell the parents, you know what? Let's just create a safety plan. And that is really going to be the only rule for now.
Yeah.
Just a
Right.
really solid safety plan. And I think we can do this
That's
in the
right.
classroom too. And then everything else, we can do Ross Green. We can do collaborative problem solving. We'll work through
Yeah.
it until the child is able to cognitively understand.
Right.
Because as you know, kids with trauma, a lot of times they are acting, quote, like toddlers, because they may have had trauma in the toddler years or before in the infant years where they really didn't get their needs met. And so they may have a meltdown over the color of the cup. They literally will, even at age 12 or 15.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. And we
So,
have to protect them from that implosion
yeah,
of self-harm. We
yeah,
do. Yeah. Yeah. It's tough. It's
it is.
tough. But I like that, because you can save those hard rules for the self-preservation safety factor. And
And build
then
that, and then build and
and
build
you've
and
got
build.
that. And that's a kind of a frame. So in psychology, we talk about building a therapeutic frame.
Yes.
And I think that, children will sometimes need that frame, especially around those kinds of very, very challenging behaviors, because their instinct may be to do something harmful to themselves or others, which of course
Yeah.
they would later really regret.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so there's so many
Wow.
things I want to ask you about, but we do have limited time. I just want to maybe we'll wrap up this part of the discussion with the LOVE acronym. Can you talk about the LOVE
Okay.
acronym, since
Yeah.
Valentine's Day is right around the corner? How can we approach our kids with more love?
Oh, I know. I was thinking of love a lot when I was writing the book, because we all needed love and we couldn't
Don't
love
we?
each other. We couldn't be with our families. So love was on my mind. So love stands for look at your child with soft eyes. And soft eyes means kind of opening the lens, opening the camera lens, the aperture, so that you are assuming that there's goodness there, and that softness of how we look at another human is really profound in our eyes, in our facial expression. So look at your child with soft eyes. O is observe without judgment as much as possible. Just try to observe in a neutral way, without automatically judging it. V is to validate their experiences. Just validate. Don't have to agree with it. You can validate and show your presence in that active way. And then E stands for experience safety together in whatever way that is for this particular child. But you can experience safety together. You can be that symbolic warm blanket for your child, and in whatever way that means. But when you experience safety with another human over and over again, you can actually create new neural pathways that will make your brain over time predict safety rather than threat.
That's so beautiful. And it's so easy to remember, just remember to keep that love at the top of your mind, not all the other what I call the parental agenda, That's
Mm,
sometimes you gotta just drop that and just love your child for who they are, exactly where they are in this moment. So
yeah.
beautiful.
And love yourself.
Yes, and love yourself. So that's another, if we have time, we can just talk about that too. Kristen Neff's
Yeah.
self-compassion practice.
Yeah.
You talk, and I
Or
know
we can,
you
and
talk
or
about,
30 questions right now too.
yeah,
We can have any conversation too, but
yeah,
yeah.
yes, that'll be, yeah, we have a little bit of
Kristen
time.
Neff's I just love her self-compassion exercise. Or she has a bunch of them,
Yeah.
but I was just so lucky. I went to 2 week-long retreats with Kristen Neff and her partner, Chris Germer, in Big Sur. It's like these weeks, like in person meditation retreats. Now that
Those
feels
are
like
great. I
such
love
a
them.
treat
Yeah.
to be able to be in person with 100 people meditating for a whole week.
Mhm.
But the one I love so much is very simple. It's a self-compassion exercise, and it starts with when you're experiencing a difficult moment to just recognize it. Ouch, or this is hard right now. I just use ouch, like I'm hurting. Number 2, no, you're not alone. I'm never alone in this. I'm not alone. There are other people who are suffering with me. Sometimes being human involves suffering. And then the third part is, may I get what I need right now? May I provide myself what I need right now? Or something like, may I be gentle on myself? Be gentle. So it's
Beautiful.
simple. You can customize it to your own preferences, but that reminder to be gentle, I think, as parents, because we can doubt ourselves so easily. I know I have as a parent. And we can also tell ourselves there is no perfect parenting. You could
Yeah.
be the best parent in the world, and your child will have stuff guaranteed that they didn't like about what you did, because we are not them.
And when
We
we
do
make
our best.
mistakes, we can apologize to our children. We can repair
Yes.
the relationship.
Yes.
And I think it makes it stronger because then they see us as human beings too. And they go, oh, mom's not perfect either. It takes a little bit of the pressure off of them as well, I think.
Right. 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 Our humanness.
Yes. Well, wonderful. So we will have some question and answer time here in just a minute. But before
Oh,
we do that,
cool.
tell us about the book. Tell us how people can get the book
Oh,
and
thanks.
all of that.
Well,
And how they can find you online and all of that.
oh, sure. Well, my website is monadelahooke.com, and I'll have all sorts of information about the book there, but it's available for pre-order now. I'm not sure when your community will be listening to this, but it's going to be uh, launched or out in the mail on March 15th, which is about a month away. And yeah, I'm doing a masterclass, a 3-part masterclass for those who pre-order the book before March, before the launch on March 15th. And so I'll be talking about the book as people are reading it and answering questions along the way too.
Excellent.
And yeah, I'll follow on Facebook and Instagram at Mona Delahooke too. So
Thank
yeah.
you so much. So everybody go do your pre-order so you can do the course and buy a couple extra copies and give them to any parent you know who is struggling or who maybe just is a younger parent who needs some resources. And of course, all the parents that have children with trauma, I think the more resources they have, the better. So definitely let them know. All
Thank you.
right. Well, let's transition. We've got about 10 minutes. We're going to have some Q&A time. So if you have a question, maybe if you go down to reactions, everybody, if you scroll down to reactions, click on raise your hand if you have a question, and we'll just call on you. Let me change to my gallery. Julie has a question. Julie, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Sure. Hi. Thanks for talking to us. This is really interesting for me. I work with children that have ongoing high existing trauma, adversity, and it's generational. So my question to you is, how can I support the parents of my littles? Our program works, the philosophy is conscious discipline. So that meshes with a lot of what I'm hearing from you and from your first book. So I feel like you're an excellent resource for me to reach out and say, what can I do at the door? And it's a pandemic, so we're not doing the family engagement like we were. Zoom is a total waste of time for us to engage with these parents. Um, and hello and acceptance and non-judgment and all of this great things, we're doing that. We just have been rotating on a carousel of that for now. It's coming up to the second full year. And the behaviors and the parents are still, you know, gritting their teeth and saying, well, if you're not at, you know, luckily you're at school, or I'd biff you now, you know, like, or they're still not, there's like safety issues. So no, those that can afford cars, we have one family that uses the car seats consistently. Like there's some, and you know, there's just so many safety things for the kids that we love to support the parents. And we know that these are young parents. These are parents that are transitioning out of homelessness. And the storm they're in makes our storm look, you know, different. Like we have so many more resources than the parents that we want. And I don't want to push them away. And they know their kid is in a good space, but we are so struggling to help these parents in any way, even just like a little niblet of something. Giving them a free copy of this book would not, no offense, they're just not, they're in the red blue of adulthood. What would be your elevator pitch for us to say, continue to meet them where they're at and kind of love them at the door and, you know, hold space for them? And is that enough, or am I doing disjustice for the little students that I have? Should I expect more out of ourselves? That's kind of a heavy question, but.
Oh, it's so profound. What you're saying is so profound, is just loving them at the door. I think we can't underestimate the power of staying with it, of being there for them. And you're recognizing, Julie, that Zoom, I mean, it's difficult enough face to face. What these families have gone through, you're right. When you come from a place of privilege, many of us can't even imagine the internal and external chaos the families have gone through, with their services gone, with their children in and out of school, and their daycare situations. Everything has blown up. So I am just so glad you're there. And do you envision, what state are you in? Does your state have any idea on when things may be getting better? Because here we're learning that things are Omicron may be pretty much going away within a month. But I'm just curious if you know how long you have to be away from these folks.
Right. So I'm in Wisconsin. And I live in a county where there's over 70% vaccination rate, not with the demographic of children, families that we're working with currently. Yeah. So when we still experience a shutdown, it's an entire 10-day shutdown. People are losing their jobs. I mean, these are families that work in 2.5 jobs, but minimum wage jobs, and still experiencing food insecurities and housing issues, and on top of everything else. The problem is we also work, because we're a nonprofit, none of our families pay any tuition, which is wonderful and also awful, because we have the slow motion of change. So when a policy is put in place, it's like everything changes before it trickles down to an actual policy change that affect our families. Right. So the short answer is no. I have no idea when. So we stopped family engagements, which used to be monthly, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it was a lot. Yeah. Just to get people in for potluck and have fun first, and then put in a little something. Yeah. That's been again coming up on 2 years in March.
That is so crazy, because that is the pathway. Those monthly meetings, those having a potluck together, sharing a laugh, sharing some food, looking at another person and valuing them, those soft eyes that say, Mama, Dada, how are you doing? Oh my goodness, you should have seen what your little did today. It was so amazing. And we love them up like like we love up children, but with respect to the adult that they are, but the appealing to that human need for recognition. And so my heart breaks. On one hand, my heart breaks that it's been going on 2 years, but I'm very hopeful because from what you've said in your beautiful descriptions, you all know what the frame is. It's relationships. And you can love at the door. It has to be good enough right now. But I'd say if there's any resources available for, we're talking infrastructure stuff, diapers, food, like things right now. Sometimes handing over from in our area, we have some of our local vendors giving us stuff. We have gift baskets. So we say, here, Mama, Dada, in the door, and their face lights up. I mean, we have to be creative. Hold the frame, and they are going to remember you. Those potlucks will come back. You will look at them in the eye, and you will be building the infrastructure through the process of intergenerational shifting the model, because you're valuing relationships and you're showing those kiddos what it's like to feel that too. So I wish there was an easy answer, but I think it sounds like you all have this frame. You have a trauma-informed lens, and we have to hold on to it and hold on to hope, because these families are going to need us, and the tsunami is coming. So,
well, thanks for the terminology. I love it. So I appreciate that.
Does anybody, we just have a couple more minutes. Does anybody else have questions for Mona? And you can just unmute yourself if you'd like, or raise your hand, or you can type it in the chat.
I do.
Yes, Laura.
I have a question. I've worked in kindergarten for years and years and years, and seen the change over time. And I was wondering how we break down the attunement, or the architecture of attunement, that these children that are coming into kindergarten, you can tell they haven't had those experiences. So in a practical sense, in kindergarten, how do we put attunement into their days so that they can, because they're coming in with very little. Yeah. And then how do we keep that so they're emotionally growing in their development?
Yeah, beautiful question, Laura. And I'm assuming your question is that this is a framework of dealing with the children because you don't have access to the parents. Is that right? No. Right. No. Okay. So yeah. Okay. Because if we do have access to the parents, we go one way, but if we don't, we go another. But again, I think your question is showing how much you know what's missing. It's that attunement piece, because responsive care involves these steps: noticing a child's needs, a baby or toddler's needs, properly interpreting what it is, and then 3, meeting that need. And humans need that done in real time. So many of our kiddos whose parents or caregivers aren't able to do responsive care, they may guess wrong, or they may not have the ability to meet that need right away for whatever their own personal circumstance. So you've got kids coming in that are probably kindergartners who are probably less self-regulated than they could be if they would have had responsive care.
Exactly.
Yeah. So my answer to that, or one of my suggestions to that, is that we try to upstaff our kindergarten rooms. And in some of our places, we have volunteer grandparents from the community, but we get more loving adults in the classroom. Because the cool thing about trauma-informed care is that we know that it could be you. It could be an aide in the classroom. A child needs one person who thinks they're really cool and pays attention to the shifting looks on their face. Like, say you had a really responsive couple of aides in the classroom. I know that might not work in whatever district you're in, but the aide would look at a child and all of a sudden they start to frown, or they get this scared look on their face, and they'd be like, hey, sweetie pie, hey, how's it going? What's happening? Instead of like, work on your math worksheet, it's like, hey, buddy, do you need a hand right now? Can you talk to me? You look like you might be feeling a little bit sad. So I'd say warm the room up. Be that adult. I know the main teacher can't do it. I know that. But if we get some volunteers in there who have that ability, and if you get buy-in in a trauma-informed lens from your school to say, we can't do a workaround on warm bodies in the classroom. We need more help. Again, I wish there was a better answer, but we can't teach self-regulation. We can't tell a child, I'm so sorry you didn't get attunement, and here's your workaround. They have to experience it. So responsive care is, I do have this, by the way, I have a few of these galleys I can send you if you don't want to buy the book, but I describe it in the book, how to do responsive care. And I think it's written in language that teachers will understand. And it's kind of those 3 steps laid out, like this is what it looks like. And I give examples, because I don't think that responsive care is talked about in education very much. It's stuck in trauma treatment. And I think every teacher needs to know about those 3 steps of responsive care.
Yes. And I just want to say, as a high school teacher, that approach works for high school kids too. I can't tell you how many times I would stop somebody in the hallway or somebody in my classroom who would just look down and say, sweetie, you look like you're having a hard day. What's going on? And they melt. They're looking for that attachment and that attunement. They need that kind of adult, because they don't, even if they go home and they have an adult they care about, that adult is probably distracted and trying to work 2 jobs, and there's just not enough time in the day to get all the good feelings in. So the more adults they have, the better.
We can't underestimate its power. It's really very, very powerful. And there's a lot of hope.
Do we have time for one more question, or do we need to wrap up?
Let me see what time we are here.
4 minutes after the hour.
We could do one more question. Sure. If someone has one.
Do you have a question? Unmute yourself. And whoops, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, a little bit. It's a little bit choppy, so just speak really slowly and clearly. Whoops, I can't hear you, sweetie. Try. Do you have earphones on, or do you have? Maybe hold it. Oh no, still can't hear you. I'm so sorry. Do you want to type your question and I'll just read it? Or try one more time.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, yes, perfect.
Okay.
Perfect. Yay.
Sorry about that.
Go ahead.
I work in Watts, Mona, for LUSD. Yeah.
Oh, you are down the street from me. Wow.
And okay, so I have a parent that I want to recommend this book to, but I don't want to. She's asked me for help because, but she's one of my parents that have a higher education and will be able to understand this book. So I will be able to. She's not doesn't have her own challenges. Her son is just born with some challenging behaviors.
Okay.
So how would I recommend, like, I'm going to buy it for her because but what do I say? Like, because I've already alienated one parent trying to help my other students. That's all over the place. So I don't want to do it again.
It's so tricky, right? I know. it's so tricky. It's like, and I think it's like when people, like when teachers, are you a teacher or
Yeah, I'm a transitional kindergarten teacher.
PK teacher? Okay, great. I know it's so dicey for teachers to even to recommend, like when we used to be able to recommend to go see a therapist, like it would, the teachers be like, I want to recommend you go see a psychologist. I mean, it's so embarrassing, and you could, like, you just don't know if people are going to take it the wrong way. So I get what you're saying, but I think that the way I would phrase it with this particular parent would be, because you know that she's is it she or he?
Yeah, it's
so
mother.
yeah, so it's a tricky child, so it might be more like, hey, I have noticed how incredible you are, and your kiddo is amazing. He's a little tricky, and so he's got, wow, you are so amazing, and there's maybe some information out there that could help understand kiddos who are that bright and that you kind of use the brilliance of the child and how unique he or she is to say there might be some information that can help.
Yeah.
It's a dance, I know.
Yeah.
He's not he was born like this, like we've had discussions, and he's not, there's no trauma. It's how did you call that? What was the way you referred to the brain?
Neurodivergence.
It's pretty much that. I've never heard that before, but that's him. My other students are the trauma.
Okay, so you're really, great. So that's important, because you're seeing that his individual differences, he's had them from birth.
Yeah.
And those unique differences, it's important to not categorize those as deficiencies, but something to be really curious about and to help him reach his best self. So I think that's really amazing that you are seeing that in him, and that she may also, has she asked you for help? Has she said?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because I've been working with him, and she's seen an improvement in his, because he's very reactive. And he's very, like, he doesn't understand other people's point of view. I mean, he doesn't even care.
Okay.
So, and I understand he's very egocentric at his age and developmentally, but it's just, and you can't touch him, like, when he's that way, like, and he'll just push you out of the way.
Okay. So he sounds like he's really struggling at some very basic levels of self-regulation. Like he can't really regulate his emotions or behavior. So he's really kind of defensive.
Yes. So
exactly. We might want to say to the mom that if there's a little bit of a delay, his self-regulation is challenged, but he's got all the component parts, and we just want to help him feel more regulated in his body. And here's a book that might help you figure out how to help him feel more comfortable in his body.
Feel more comfortable, feel more regulated. That's perfect.
Feel more regulated. Yeah. That's kind of neutral, and it's saying it's not her. It's just, let's figure out what are the keys that'll unlock this little guy's regulation.
Okay, I like that. Thank you so much.
And I wanted to add too, some of you are in the training to become parent coaches and educational trainers. And I think really working as a team with psychologists and therapists, school counselors, but having another parent or another teacher who's gone through the same thing is really, really helpful, because then there's less of a feeling of defensiveness when you have had that experience yourself. So I think, the more teamwork, the more different kinds of lenses we can bring, I think it's going to really help too. And we'll talk about the program. So, well, Mona,
this is so wonderful. I have to go for I have the 6:15 Zoom really quick, but thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here so much. And everyone, make sure you get a copy of the book. Check out
You guys are awesome. Thank you.
Check out all of her material. She's constantly posting wonderful articles and infographics, and just follow all of her channels so that you can get that fantastic information. And as you all know, I'm Sandy Lerman from Heartstrong International. You can reach us at heartstronginternational.com. And we have this Trauma-Informed Changemakers book club and community, as well as programs for trauma-informed specialists, parent coaches, and educational trainers. Thank you all so much for being here. It has been a delight to have you, Mona, and have a good evening, everyone. Take care.